All right, welcome to Circuit Mathematics. Now, in our previous video, we established or we noted out two theorems in cycle geometry. The first theorem was that angles in the same segment of a circle are equal, and the second theorem we looked at was that angle subtended by an arc at the center of the circle is twice the angle subtended by that arc on the circumference of the circle. So we used two shapes to illustrate those theorems. Do well to check our previous videos on circle theorems, and we're going to be applying those theorems in solving these problems before us. So we have two problems before us. Find the lettered angles in the figures below. We have a figure here. This is figure 1. We'll call this figure 1 or question 1. I'll call this figure 2. Figure 2. Okay. Now, we're going to be finding the lettered angles in these figures. Now, the first thing we're going to be doing, we're going to be putting alphabets on these points on the circle to make reference easy for us. So that's the first thing we do. We put alphabets on this point. So I can call this X, I call this Y, I call this Z, I call this figure 1, call this P, and I call this point Q. For this, I'm going to call this X, Y, Z, call this P. All right, now let's get back to the first problem. We have to find A, B, and C. Now, in that theorem, we said angles in the same segment of a circle are equal. Don't forget that we established that two angles are said to be in the same segment by the principle of the common arc. So when they originate from the same arc of the circle, they're in the same segment, therefore they are equal. Now look at A. A is coming from point X and point Y. Is there any angle coming from point X and point Y on this circumference? 40. You can see 40 is coming from point X, also coming from point Y. So angle P and angle Q are equal. We can say that A is equal to 40 degrees. And the reason is that angles in the same segment. Okay, now what about B? Of course, B is also coming from point X and point Y. And so if A and 40 are equal, it means B is also equal to 40 by that principle. So B is also equal to 40. The same reason. Okay, now we have a last angle C. Now, how do you find C? Just do well to first trace the point where C is coming from. Now, if you look at this shape, C is coming from point Q and point Z. You look at it, point Z and point Q. Now, there is another angle made by a line coming from point Q and point Z, and that is 32. So we can say that C is equal to 32 degrees. Let's have degrees. Angle in the same segment. So let me just go through it again. A is equal to 40. A is 40 because angle 40 is coming from X and Y, and A is also coming from X and Y. So they are equal. They are on the circumference. Look at angle B. Angle B is coming from point X and point Y, just like 40 degrees coming from point X and point Y. So B is equal to 40. The same reason angles in the same segment are equal. Okay, now looking at angle C, it's now on the lower part of the circumference. However, you can observe that C is coming from point Q and point Z. This 32 is coming from the same point Q and point Z. So C is equal to 32 degrees. angles in the same segment are equal. Now we are done with this. Now moving on to number 2. We're going to be applying two theorems here. We have to find V and W. To find V and W, find V and W. Now, what do you observe in W? W will be equal to 32 degrees. Why? Angles in the same segment. Why are they in the same segment? 32 is coming from the arc XY. See, coming from X and coming from Y. Also, Z is coming from X, coming from Y. And they both lie on the circumference. So they are said to be in the same segment. Now, V is also coming from point X and Y. But V is not equal to 32. The reason is because V is not on the circumference. Now, O is the center of the circle. Don't forget. Point O is the center of the circle. Center of the circle. Now, how do we find V? V is angle subtended at the center, and 32 is the angle subtended on the circumference. Don't forget that our second theorem in the previous video said angle subtended at the center is twice angle subtended by the arc, the same arc on the circumference. Angle subtended by an arc on the center is twice angle subtended by that arc on the circumference. So applying that theorem straight away, we can see that V is equal to what? 2 times 32 degrees. Or you can say that XOY is equal to 2 times XPY. Angle at the center. Angle at the center is twice the angle subtended on the circumference. So by that, we have that V is equal to 2 times 32, 64 degrees. Therefore, W is equal to 32 degrees. V is equal to 64 degrees. So that solves the problem. We've been able to find A, B, C, W, and V. So in our next video, we'll solve more examples of circle theorems. So take this. Jesus.